Welcome to Giant Squid Group's Lunch and Learn. We've got a few folks coming on and connecting, and we'll start in about 3 or 4 minutes as more folks are able to join. And as y'all are joining, feel free to chat who you are and what organization you're in, so we can get a nice idea of where everyone is from, and then also turn on your video if you want. This is definitely a more the merrier kind of session. So happy to have you all here. And Karina, how is your morning going so far?
Oh, you know, it's another beautiful morning in quarantine.
Yeah. And it's really humid here in Texas today.
Oh my God, I know. I was dying yesterday in particular. I think I'm slightly more acclimated today. I don't know about y'all. Yeah, the humidity, I was like, no, this is not gonna work.
Yeah, it's we ate breakfast and second breakfast, my toddler, outside, and it was really nice, but I'm like, I don't think we're gonna be doing much walking or adventuring or playing outside today unless it's in the shade, preferably with the fan on us and, you know, feet in a baby pool.
Yeah, I kind of had a similar, I tried to work outside this morning for a little bit with my dogs, and didn't last that long before the sun came back out. One of my dogs too, they just got groomed Wednesday. Finally, I've been like killing myself trying to get them into the groomers. And one of them is like, I can tell he feels really good. Like, he's so riled up. He is so full of energy. And he may come harass me during this. He was like scratching at me and making all kinds of vocalization stuff. Like, mama, give me attention. I don't know where he is right now.
Yeah. Well, we've got 3 folks that have joined so far, which is wonderful. I'm going to give us till 11:05 to see if anyone else wants to join. I know a few folks have emailed me saying today was proving difficult, but I am recording this, so we'll be able to send it out as well, which is fantastic. And I'd love to hear from everyone else. We've got Sky, welcome, Taylor, and Caroline. Since we've got such a small group, I would love if you're comfortable turning on your video or turning on your audio and introducing yourself and saying hi.
So here's my video. Wasn't ready for video today.
You don't have to do video, but look, this is my quarantine. This was like a really cute picture.
This is my work from home look.
Yeah,
this is my work from home look.
Yep.
And
I'm wearing yoga pants.
I have just recently filed my paperwork for my nonprofit called Canine Connections.
Oh, wonderful.
So I'm a baby in the space. And so here I am.
And where in the country and world are you located?
Oh, speaking of humid, I'm in Florida, South Florida, and it is basically liquid air out today. So yes, I'm right there with you ladies as far as we won't be doing anything outside today.
Well, yeah. And what's the mission of Canine Connections?
So Canine Connections' mission is to assist low-income and homeless pet owners with connecting with resources such as I want to establish a pet food pantry, and eventually work with veterinarians and trainers in the community to provide services to those persons that are either low income or homeless. My direction that I think I want to go initially is I really want to focus on homeless veterans that are pet owners. And I know that may seem like a very strange kind of thing, but in Florida, where you have, let's call it good weather year round, there's actually a fair percentage of our homeless population that own pets. And because pets are such a huge part of mental health, and that's a huge, another component altogether to the homeless problem, it's important for them to be able to maintain those pets and keep those pets and have one less thing to worry about. So
absolutely, I love that. Carolyn, email me, or is it Carolyn or Caroline?
Caroline,
email me just in case I forget, because Karina and I were talking. It's a forgetful day. What we have, Giant Squid Group is a wonderful partner we've worked with for a long time out in New Jersey that works with veterans who are experiencing homelessness. And they've been here for 4 years, and they've done tremendous work. So I would love to connect you and their executive director, Alexa, because they're very plugged into working with homeless vets. And I think you two would just have a lot to talk about. So
Okay,
I would love
fantastic.
to introduce you.
I will
Yeah.
do that.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and get started. We've had a few folks. We're kind of having people pop on and off, which is wonderful. We were hoping for a small group so we can really get into the nitty gritty. So Skye and Carolyn, you are in luck today. So I'm going to hand it over to Karina, and you both have your video on, which is wonderful. And I know, Skye, you've been on some of these before. This is really a conversation. This is not a webinar where we're going to talk to you for an hour and, you know, hope that you're not multitasking. When we started doing these lunch and learns at the start of quarantine, which we thought would be, you know, 3 weeks, that was 3 months ago, it was in response to folks asking explicitly for a place to come and talk and learn from other nonprofit folks. So that's what this is. And it's wonderful. Sometimes we have, you know, 4 folks on like today. Sometimes we have 20. It's really just every other Friday, more or less, we get together to chat and learn from someone much smarter than us, which I love. So I am so excited to have Karina here today. She's going to walk us through a few, I believe, slides or insights, and then we'll be able to really just open it up for questions. So Caroline and Skye, as she's talking, feel free to type questions into the chat box or just, you know, chime in, but we will have a really decent amount of time to workshop, especially with a small group. And we are recording this as well, so we'll be able to share this. So with that, Karina, please give us your background, and I'll turn it over to you. And you should be able to share your screen. So let me know if you have any problems.
Perfect. I will do that in just a sec. Yay, I'm so excited. I'm really excited that we have such a small group today, because I do think that part of the power in making this stuff, you know, not clear as mud and actually clear by the end of it is actually practicing, right, and trying. So I think this is awesome. And I think for our folks who are, you know, missing out, but maybe can watch the recording, it'll give them some really concrete stuff to delve into too. So thank you guys for being here and being willing to share and engage. Okay, so we learned a little bit, Caroline, I can't remember.
Caroline.
Cool. We learned a little bit about, you were telling us a little bit about your organization. And Skye, I'm sorry if I missed it. Can you tell me what organization you're with and kind of what the mission is?
Yeah, so I work at a therapeutic riding center in Austin, Texas called Horse Empowered Learning Programs. Our mission is to serve children and adults with disabilities through horseback riding. And I was just hired back in February. I'm very new to the nonprofit world. So yeah.
And what's your role there?
I am a part-time volunteer coordinator and a part-time development coordinator.
Okay, awesome.
And
that's
Karina,
really
I think that we are going to have so much fun today because it sounds like both Caroline and Skye are newer to this. Canine Connections is new. I've been lucky enough to work with HELP. They're celebrating 36 years, but just launching a grants program for the first time and have just been submitting their first grants. So we, you know, can really focus on our love of animals. We've got horses and we've got dogs, hurrah, 2 of my favorite 4-legged creatures, and you know, affectionately newbies, which is really exciting that we're all coming to this from the same page. Caroline, do you have any previous grant writing experience?
I don't. I did work for the Seminole Tribe of Florida in their legal department. I'm a paralegal by profession. And we assisted with a lot of their grants. So I've been exposed to the grant writing process and review and requirements of various, you know, agencies and whatnot. But as far as like full-blown grant writing myself, no.
Great. Well, then we're all on the same page. I wanted to make sure you weren't like going to be bored. So for fantastic. Karina, back to you.
Yay, cool. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you all for orienting me a little bit and kind of understanding where everybody's coming from. Let me share my screen, theoretically. Helps if I have the window open that I actually want to share, huh? Let me try that one more time. Like, why am I not seeing my PowerPoint? There we go. Okay, can y'all see that?
Yes, looks great.
Great. All right. Cool. So we are going to write some goals and objectives today. That said, though, because this is such a small group and because it sounds like y'all are both a little newer to the grant writing process, and I know that's a common thing for some of your clients, Catherine, that feel free to ask we can totally, take this in other directions, go on some tangents, talk about, other aspects of grants and grant writing. But the kind of idea behind our conversation today was really about unlocking writing your goals and objectives as you're developing a program within the grant process, all that good stuff to help really communicate and articulate what it is that you're trying to do and what it is that makes your program so impactful. In addition to, meeting that requirement question on the grant proposal, right? So these are great regardless of what kind of proposal you're filling out. You wanna have this down and kind of have your language figured out. So that's our goal for today, or that's our topic for today. So for a little example, I did some goals and objectives for our workshop to get us started. So our goal is that you guys are going to gain knowledge, skills, more confidence in writing effective program goals and objectives. And within that goal, we are going to learn, I want you guys to be able to name maybe 5 key concepts or tips that you take away about writing goals and objectives. You're going to gain 3+ new resources to support, goal development. And you are going to practice with me and yours and get some feedback today. So as a little preview of kind of the world that we're in, I wanted to give you guys a snapshot of our goals and objectives for this workshop. We kind of did some of the introductions I wanted to ask about you guys and just get to know, who's on the call. But I'll share a tiny bit more about me and my background too. These are my puppers, Luna, my Shih Tzu, and Tibby, my crazy Jack Russell Poodle mix. We are here in Austin dealing with the heat and humidity. I am originally from Austin, actually. I work with a nonprofit called Creative Action. We're a community-based arts organization here in Austin, Texas. And we're really focused on using the arts as a platform to support academic, social, and emotional development among young people and social change and social justice in the larger community. And we do that in a couple of different ways. We have in-school programs where our teaching artists go into school classrooms and they, tour these interactive performances, and they give professional development to teachers and all kinds of stuff that's, curriculum aligned. We have tons of after-school programming, and then our other bucket is our community programs. And so we have some really cool teen programs, which I'm going to use kind of in some examples later on, so you'll hear a little bit about those, where we actually pay teen artists to make really amazing work for the community. We do all kinds of community events, classes for parents and little kids under 5. We have programs for older adults. So lots of stuff going on at Creative Action. And so that's where a lot of my experience comes from, having been with the organization now for about eight-ish years, and really seeing the growth and development of so many programs. And so having to figure some of this stuff out, right? Like, what is it that we're really trying to do with this program, and how do we start to articulate what this program looks like versus this, thing that we've been doing, and sort of, what is the need for that and all that good stuff. So I've seen a lot of new program development. I've worn a lot of hats at Creative Action. I started as a volunteer making costumes. My background's in theater production. I was a teaching artist. I was an AmeriCorps Vista. I was a grant writer. I was a volunteer coordinator, grant writer. I've managed our gala. I've supported board development. And now I'm in this kind of funky hybrid jack of all trades role that I adore, with a, made up title, Director of Special Projects, because I work on kind of directing our grants portfolio, program evaluation and research, and all kinds of strategic planning stuff. So I love a little bit of everything. And yeah, this stuff gets me really excited. So I'm excited to talk to you guys more about it, but that's a little bit about me and my background, just so you kind of know where I'm coming from. And the last thing I'll mention too is that I do pull from some social work resources today, because I am also finishing my master's in social work at UT. And so that's been kind of fun, revisiting some of the fundamentals and going deeper in the stuff that I've kind of, you know, learned on the fly over the years. So it was neat being able to be like, ooh, I got a book that'll that can help, you know, explain all of this to us. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that's me. That's a little bit of background. Okay, so we're gonna just jump right into it, and I'm gonna move my little, sorry, I keep like moving the video around so I can read the screen. Okay, so, and this is from, oops, this is from, straight up from this program evaluation handbook that I love. It's very thorough, has lots of good stuff on from an evaluation perspective. But this is kind of adapted from that and from my own experience and kind of thinking about these things. So when we're talking goals, objectives, and strategies, again, you're gonna either see that explicitly on a grant application, right? Where they're like, tell me what your goals and objectives are for this program. Or they're just gonna say, tell me about your program. Give me, you know, 3 pages. And, you know, explain to us what you do and why we should fund it. And that's where, again, regardless of the format, I really like this as a fallback, because it helps take this intangible stuff, the mission, the values, the aspirations, the vision, right? And put it into concrete terms so that somebody can go, yeah, but what are you doing, right? I feel like that's always one of the things in grant writing that can be a real barrier, is that we can get lost in the jargon or the mumbo jumbo or the, you know, the kind of aspirational statements, and we're not actually telling the funder what we're doing. And so this is a really nice framework for that. You could put this in a chart, you can make bullet points, you could use numbers, you could put it in paragraph form. You know, it really just kind of depends on the proposal and your needs. But regardless of that, this is kind of how you can think about breaking it down. So starting with goals, and it might just be a goal. It might be a couple of, you know, high level goals. But so our goals are at the top, and they're general, they're high level. They give us some orientation, right? So where are we taking this program? Where are we headed? They kind of paint that picture for us. They are aspirational, right? They are connected to mission, vision, values. So they can be a little bit more grandiose or lofty, right? And a little bit, you know, flowery is not quite the right word, but you can paint the picture in that sort of way where you're really giving folks a vision. And so that's our goals. So then objectives, on the other hand, we want those to be really concrete. So it's, what are you actually going to do? Well, I shouldn't say what are you actually going to do. This is where objectives and strategy starts to get confusing and the language can get muddled. So objectives is a way of talking about your targets for what you're going to do. So it's the specific, measurable, actionable outcomes. So, you know, what's going to be accomplished and by when? And as much as possible, how can we give numbers to that, right? Metrics. The book that I showed you guys has a nice little like formula that they sort of use, which is one way to think about it, which is you got your verb, you got your target, and you've got your date. So for example, one of the examples they give is you're going to increase admissions by 10% by June 30th, 2020. So that would give you, let's say you're a theater company or whatever the heck you're selling admissions for, right? So we've got our verb, we're increasing, we've got our target, we're trying to increase admissions by this amount, 10%, and we've got our end date. I personally, when I'm grant writing, the date I don't always I don't always let the date live in that, like with the specific objective. Sometimes that's more about a timeline, right? For how the program develops. Like if I've already given them a timeline of, you know, the first 2 months, we're recruiting, we're, you know, team building with the young people who join this program. You know, the next couple months, we're doing some scaffolding, you know, scaffolded exercises to build certain artistic skills and introduce these social justice concepts. Then in the, you know, final months, we're getting into, you know, this culminating project, and then we're going to measure and evaluate it. And this is our end date. Sometimes you want to give that to them, you know, in its own kind of chunk. And so maybe you don't need as much the timeline in the objectives because it's kind of clear that this is by the end of the program. But that's something you can build into the sentence, right? Like, our objectives are that by the end of the program, youth will, right? And then you've got your list or whatever. So you can build it in. It doesn't have to be like every objective ever has an exact date associated with it, right? But generally speaking, it's time bound. And I'm sure you guys have heard of our, you know, SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, I think is the A, time, what am I missing? Time bound and
Relevant, that's the R.
I know, like trying to think through them. They get out of order. But so SMART is a good acronym to remember, but if that doesn't work for you, this kind of verb, target, end date to give us a time constraint is a nice model for that. Then we have our activities. So what are we going to do? Our strategies. What are we going to do to achieve those goals and objectives? So if our goal, let's use that admissions one. So if we're trying to increase admissions by 10%, are we going to, you know, implement some kind of, you know, incentive program that's going to help people bring their friends into, you know, the theater? Are we going to, do some kind of marketing campaign, right? That's gonna get admissions up. What are we gonna do to get there? And I think that's where the feasibility thing comes in again. So what's really tangible with your given resources, whether that's staff, funding, time, right? How long do we have to actually pull this off? So that feasibility piece kind of comes into play, both in the objectives and in our strategies, of course. And one way to think about your strategies too is your inputs and outputs in your logic model. So in your logic model, if we've got, you know, here's kind of our overall, you know, the mission of our program, we're gonna put these resources in, we're gonna do these activities, and then what are we gonna get out of it? Our outputs and our outcomes. And so you can kind of think about objectives and strategies as strategies can be your inputs, your activities, sometimes it's your outputs. Objectives, it starts to be your outputs and your outcomes, and goals might be like your long-term outcomes. Yeah, so we start to get that kind of frame of reference with our logic model. So that can be a really nice thing to go back to. I'm gonna pause for questions or comments. Everybody,
I love the verb and specific target. I think if nothing else, that is so helpful with objectives, because often what I see with folks that are new to grant writing is they get very overwhelmed by the goals and objectives, and their goals and objectives don't say anything. They're just a bunch of buzzwords. And so I would so much rather see, like you said, increase admissions by 10%, or, you know, maybe in Caroline's case, it's like, feed 25 dogs, you know, whose owners are experiencing homelessness or something. Just so simple, but you totally get, oh, that's what they're doing, not some glorious wishy-washy language that sounds really great and doesn't tell you anything.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I actually really like that. When I was looking back at in my little book too, I like that they give some examples of what not to do in your program objectives. So maybe I'll read a couple of those that are really aligned with what you were just saying. Things like to help clients discover healthier relationships with others. That is definitely not an objective. I have no idea how we would measure that. I have no idea what that looks like. there's nothing specific about that, right? To help students become better citizens, right? Super, super lofty, aspirational, that lives in your goals language. And even then, I mean, I say that, I always caution, I mean, I like to think about punchy goals too, right? Like, we don't want it to just be full of buzzwords that, again, nobody knows what we're talking about, or it's too generic, right? That it doesn't actually feel like something that's specific to our program and what's kind of unique about what we do. And so I think that's one thing to keep in mind with goals too, is that thinking about you know, that external perspective of, would somebody really get something about the essence of our program, you know, from reading this statement? And is it still kind of like concrete enough that it's not our vision statement, right? Just sort of restated as a goal. So those are some things to think about. Let's see. Oh yeah. Okay. So I have an example, but these can all be made better. And I want to see if you guys can tell me how we would make these objectives and goals, how we might make these better based on what we just talked about. So my example is about Creative Actions Changing Lives Youth Theater Ensemble. So this is a program that we run with the SAFE Alliance here in Austin. So the youth receive training around healthy relationships and you know, bullying prevention and recognizing dating abuse. It's really a dating violence prevention program and a theater education program in one. So then the students create an original production each year that they tour to peers to help spread the message and sort of articulate this in real world, you know, the real lived experiences of youth in a way that adults just can't communicate, right? So that's a little bit of background on the program. So the goal of Changing Lives is to help teens develop the knowledge and skills to sustain healthy relationships through the power of peer-led theater. That's my goal statement. Tells you a little bit of the aspirational piece, right? Like sustaining healthy relationships into, there's a future element. There's the power of peer-led theater. We're kind of giving a little bit of context for, you know, what's unique about this program that's not just any other, you know, relationship program. We're kind of giving you like a mini taste of what the program is. Now you can even break this down, right? This could be either an overall goal statement, or we could break it down into a couple of goal statements. We could have, you know, one of our goals is about sustaining healthy relationships. One of our goals is about, you know, this theater education piece. So we could do that, but I kind of just stuck it all in one for the purpose of this. So let's get into our objectives, and you guys can tell me what we need to do. So objective 1, youth will know the indicators of healthy and abusive relationships. Any thoughts on that one?
Instead of using the word know, use the word learn.
You could, yeah. So that there's a sense of like they're gaining, that there's a growth element. Yeah, something that's time, that could give that sense of time, right? That they've learned something through the course of this program.
I would say kind of describing what the indicators are.
Getting more specific about the indicators. Yeah, so we could name out youth will increase their knowledge of X, Y, Z indicators. Yeah, I love that. We could definitely make that more concrete. That one's a tricky one to add a whole lot more numbers to, but I have a couple thoughts on where we could plug in more, some additional metrics. So we'll circle back to that maybe, because it kind of applies to all of them. Okay, so number 2, teens will report increased confidence helping a peer who is experiencing harassment, bullying, or abuse. Any thoughts on that one?
One thing that I would love to oh, sorry, go ahead, Sky.
I was going to say, how are they going to report the increased confidence helping a peer who is experience harassment, etc.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and you bring up something that was just where this all starts to get so murky too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what you're also talking about is our evaluation method, right? So we want to be able to kind of look at the objectives and have some idea of how are we going to measure this. But maybe we don't need to know like what the actual tool is, right? That we're using to measure this in the objective statement. That could go, that might be a next question on your grant application. It might be another, section that you go to, like, and here's how, here are the tools that we use to measure this. It could be a table that shows, that breaks down your goals, your objectives, and then gets into those kind of measurement pieces. And a lot of times that's something that, as you get more advanced, you might want to have on the back end anyway, that kind of breaks down for program staff or, internally, how are we measuring all these pieces, and do we have all the things in place that we need, to measure this? So I like where you're going with that.
If I put my funder hat on, I'm wondering, how many kids are we talking about? 10?
Yes.
200? If you're asking me for, let's say $25,000, am I going to be reaching a whole school of students, or an after school program where only 10 kids show up?
Ding, ding, ding. I love it. That was definitely where I was thinking too, in terms of numbers. I have one other thought on making really both of these two measurable in another way that you could do that. If anybody has any suspicions.
The other thing I would wonder, and if y'all are asking the same question, is how, in terms of what does peer-led theater mean? Is it, is it an after-school program? Is it improv workshops? Are they going to stage a whole play? And I actually am legitimately asking this. I have no idea. So if I were to read this, I would have more questions than when I started. So I think we could get way more specific, like you said, in that how they're going to go about doing this.
Yep. And so that might be where we would then, from here, as we get these objectives, we're going to go off and really lay out what are the strategies, right? And again, that might be really structured based on kind of how the funder wants to see it, or what makes the most sense for your program. It might be that you're making sure you're hitting all of those points in your program description, right? To make sure that you're not leaving something out, using this as kind of a test, like, do our end goals, connect to what we're putting into the program and kind of what we're talking about. So I love that too. For the sake of time, I'll just tell you guys what else I was thinking about. So the other thing that I was thinking about is that you could build in, kind of like we saw in that other example, percentages, right? Like, what percentage of participants what's our target around participants? So we know that we want them to increase these things, report these things. How many are we looking for? What's success look like for us? Is it 50%? Is it 75%? Is it 100%? Right? So adding, kind of tweaking your objectives to maybe lead with 100% of teens are gonna, have this many programming hours, collaborate to write and produce this original play and tour it to 10 plus schools, right? Which is really what they do in the program. I should have said, instead of X number of hours, it's 200 hours of programming. So we could build in some of those metrics that maybe we talked about in our program description, and that's cool too. We could build those in kind of to our objectives, as well as around some of these outcomes. So I was talking outputs, right? Like, how many hours of programming, how many kids, how many schools do we reach? We could build in some of those outputs, and then also the outcomes by looking at what really is our target of success.
And I love what you said earlier about this is really painting the picture, because that went from, regardless of how you format it, outputs, outcomes, this and that. And like you said, it's going to literally vary for every single grant application. what matters is this went from me going, okay, this sounds interesting, but there's a lot of buzzwords in here to, oh, I get it. This is a really high touch, hands-on program where kids are highly engaged. They're touring to 10 schools. 200 hours is a lot of hours. And it takes it from, here's kind of another nice youth empowerment program to, I get what they're doing. And I think that's especially so important for the folks on the call who all work in the animal field, you know, and education through animals, because that's a highly competitive field. There's a lot of animal rescues or organizations working with animals in some capacity. And it also tends to be a field where I see a lot of undeveloped work like this. And so, you know, for Caroline and Sky and Stephanie from Help, who was able to join, to be able to come in with like really simple goals and objectives, you're gonna like knock people's socks off, because you're gonna see that not a lot of other folks are doing that.
I love that context. Thank you. And the other thing I'll say at this point, which I mean, y'all are already picking up on, is that I think it's more of an art than a science, right? And you are going to see different slightly different definitions, descriptions. The way in which a funder is using these terms matters, right? So your kind of understanding and how you've got it built out may not always match the format or the language that they're using, right? And so thinking about how can I sort of align this so that it makes sense to my audience, I think is really key. And it starts to get murky, I think, between objectives, outputs, and outcomes. And they're kind of the same, they're kind of different. And so that's again where I feel like it's more of an art and kind of, you know, practice and application of this to kind of get it in your bones a little bit, and get a feel for what works for your program. And like we're talking about, just how to bring your program to life and make it feel really tangible in those ways. And that's something that I will say is particularly challenging. I know we don't have arts folks on the call today, but I know, Catherine, you've mentioned that you work with a lot of, you know, folks in the arts. But I think the same goes for, you know, animal organizations, welfare organizations like you guys. There's something intangible, right, that we're trying to make tangible and understandable. There's a feeling, there's an internal experience, there's a magic to it, right? To what you guys do, to this type of, you know, arts program. There's always going to be those really indescribable qualities. And I think the trick is not letting that distract you from being able to get to some of the tangibles, right? Like we can have that and we can find ways to capture that through stories and work samples and videos and our, you know, site visits and our, you know, really powerful grant language. And also we can give people who want numbers some numbers, right?
We're basically asking y'all to quantify the bond between, you know, dogs and people and horses and people, which is kind of impossible. But rather than thinking of that way, what I'm hearing Karina saying is like, no, we want to know how you're working to establish that bond. How many lessons does Help hold every, you know, quarter? How many dogs will Caroline be working with? How many, you know, vets who are experiencing homelessness? How many outpoints? So yeah, it can seem overwhelming, but it really is the same as if I asked you, you know, how do you run your household? You're going to go grocery shopping. You're going to vacuum. You're going to, you know, you take it into these bite-sized chunks and it goes, oh, okay, I can do that.
Love it. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
I guess, is there a required number of objectives that you have to have in your proposal, or?
That's a great question. And the answer is it 100% depends. Sometimes, for example, we have the common application for Central Texas education funders in Austin that they kind of have a very structured application, and I actually really love it. It's one of the things I recommend to new grant writers. I'm like, go download the Common application from the Central Texas Education Funders website and fill it out. It doesn't matter if you're applying to them. It is an excellent template for organizing everything you need to go into your grant and kind of thinking through those pieces. But for example, I want to say they have you do three, they have kind of 3 goals, and not to say that you have to use all of them, but it's sort of what are your 3 main goals or outcomes, and then sort of breaking down your objectives, your activities, and how you're going to measure that within there. So it's, again, the language might be slightly different, but they have a really good example of that. But a lot of times it's really just dictated by your program. Yeah. And again, you might have a goal, you might have a program that's kind of streamlined and focused enough that a single goal statement really captures, you know, what is that overarching high level goal. And then you want to break down into your objectives, or you might not. There might be a couple of goals embedded. And I mean, again, I mean, I think we could do it kind of either way with this program, for example. One thing that makes me think of too is, again, kind of scaffolding. So our mission at Creative Action is to spark and support the academic, social, and emotional development of young people. So that's like our, you know, that's our mission statement. I didn't just take that statement and rephrase it as the goal of this program, right? But some organizations that maybe you're just starting out, you really have kind of one main program area, you know, those could be more one and the same. So again, that's something to kind of think through. What do you want to highlight about this specific program if you're applying for versus your overall organization? Because that can look different on grants.
Yeah, Karina, I have a question that might take us a little into the weeds for both Caroline and Skye. So before I ask it, is there anything else in the slide deck you want to share?
Yeah, let's do one more thing. So real quick, I'll keep talking at you for just another minute. Don't overthink it. It's simpler. It's simpler than you think. I am like the queen of overthinking and going in circles and getting myself really lost sometimes in this stuff. And so sometimes just taking a step back is important. And again, kind of not getting too caught up in the semantics of the language, but understanding that our goal, right, is to go from general to specific and measurable. To really sort of articulate. So we're trying to go from high level to more tangible and specific. Some questions and things to kind of test when you've maybe got a draft. Can you measure it? Did you put some, you know, would somebody look at that objective statement and they would know they would be like, okay, I don't know what the specific, you know, survey instrument is or what their attendance document looks like or whatever, but I know that I would be looking for, you know, X number of this. I have a sense of how it could be measured. Is it jargon? Is it buzzwords, right? We already talked about that. Another way to think about it is, what does this actually look like? What does success really look like? When everything has worked perfectly, your program model has been delivered with, you know, absolute fidelity and it's the highest quality, everybody, and, you know, things have just gone like clockwork. You know, what does success really look like? And kind of that description can be really helpful. Note about program goals and client goals. That's again more of like a social worker thing, but I think it's important to think about that sometimes if you know, some of us do come from more of a clinical or program background where we might be more used to thinking about this stuff in terms of tailoring to, you know, the needs of our specific clients or, you know, our class that we're working with or whatever that looks like. And so thinking about this a little more broadly and generally than even more subjective and kind of client informed goals, right? So within like Changing Lives, for example, there might be a couple of students that like their goal is to learn about lighting design because they've never done that part of, you know, they've never gotten to do that in their theater program at school, and this is their chance, right? So that might be kind of our client goal. And as a program person, I could work with that student in a similar process to look at, okay, how are we going to make that happen, right? And how are we going to know that you reach that goal? So the same principles apply, but sometimes that scope is what we're talking about. Again, logic models. If you're not familiar with logic models, I will share some. I'm going to send this PowerPoint with some more resources this afternoon. Wearing my grad student hat with some stuff due today. I didn't finish putting all my resources I wanted to into the slide deck. So I'm going to pull a couple like templates and stuff that you guys can look at. But that's a really good resource for this because again, it's just kind of giving you a structure to think through this process of your program. And again, like we talked about sort of how the activities and inputs might align, how our outputs and outcomes might, you know, start to align, strategies and goals and objectives. And then don't hesitate to ask somebody to look at it, you know, test it out on somebody. I love, now that we're in quarantine together, like yelling to my husband from the other room, hey, does this make any sense? You know, like, you don't know anything about this program. Would you, you know, if I told you this statement, do you understand anything about this? And it's a really good way to test out, especially if it's something that's kind of like content knowledge specific. It's great to find a friend or a colleague who really knows nothing about your program area, because like you were demonstrating, Catherine, you had all kinds of, you know, more questions about, well, how does this program work? And what does it look like? And what are we talking about, right? That can help give you an idea of where the gaps are. So that's kind of the end of that. And so I don't know where we're at in terms of time. I can't see it on my screen anymore.
We have about 10 more minutes. And
oh
so
gosh, it went so fast.
Guy and Stephanie, you know, please ask questions, and or if you want to brainstorm what some of your goals and objectives could be, we can absolutely do that as well. But the question I wanted to pose for Karina that might spark some questions for Sky, Caroline, and Stephanie as well is, particularly for an organization just building a grants program, when and how might you recommend someone puts sort of some larger organizational goals and objectives in? Because that's something that that I've done, right? So we could talk about. So how could someone like Caroline, you know, also focus on a goal being to just build canine companions, and what the objectives and outcomes would go into there?
Yeah, I love that. So that might be thinking about goals around your kind of strategic plan or operational plan or capacity building. And again, I would say using the same format can really be really powerful for articulating those sorts of things too. Again, what does success for your organization look like? Are you gonna, you know, reach this many more people? Are you gonna add a new program? Are you gonna, you know, increase your fundraising goals, right? So like, what are some of those measurable things, and where's that gonna get you in terms of your overall goal statement? Like, we're gonna be the, you know, premier equine therapy organization for all of Texas, right? Or whatever that kind of big lofty goal looks like. And I would say also so much of that is dependent on the grant, right? So sometimes they give you a lot of space to talk about what is it that your overall organization does, and what are you trying to do, and how does this, you know, specific ask fit into your kind of larger strategy and plan. Sometimes they really don't, and it's a little bit of a judgment call, I think, on how much of that do you need to tell your story? And I think when you're starting out, that can be really helpful and help folks understand how this program fits in. Sometimes for an established organization, you know, people might be pretty darn familiar with what you do, especially if you're like a chapter, right, of a national organization or something like that. And so you may not need as much of that sort of exposition. So I love that question. And I think it really depends. But is definitely worth letting your funders know about somehow in your grant application as a growing organization.
I attended another webinar that was put on by our local SCORE chapter about grant writing and things of that nature. And one of the things that he mentioned was include your BAG, BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. You know, that big, that way out there, you know, down the road, massive thing that, you know, you want to get to eventually in your organization or create eventually in your organization. And it was really interesting because for me, you know, I know where I want to start, I know where I want to get to, but I was really focusing on just, you know, start here, you know, and I probably would have focused all of my time and attention on just this. When I know what I want it to look like, you know, years down the road, where it's going to go, and wouldn't have thought to include that up front at this part of the process, even though I should be.
I love that. And it's that working backwards, right? That's part of how do you know what are those next steps you can take, you're going to take, you know, this month when we haven't totally visioned or mapped out those larger goals. So that's part of what this process, whether it's for a program, an organization, doing some of that visioning work, and then, okay, how do we make that actionable, is what we're talking about. So that's a great example.
Yeah, and I think, Caroline, that, you know, that raises a really great point that we touched on, is that it's also your roadmap to how you're going to get there, right? Because your big, hairy, audacious goal could be that there is no one in Florida homeless, right? You're probably not going to achieve that. But then this year, if you're able to support 10 veterans and their pets, you have that vision of where you're going, and your goals and objectives could be around scaling and capacity building and systems. So it really, I think, helps make it into bite-sized chunks. But you definitely want that vision, which is wonderful. And I'm glad SCORE is fantastic.
One thing I want to mention on that note, that I wanted to be sure and talk about is a little bit of that external, you know, data and resources as well. So whether it's standards or best practices that are, you know, evidence-based in your focus area, whether it's, you know, data from your community that, you know, the city or some other kind of authority gathers, those can be really helpful, not only as you're giving your needs statement, but in thinking about, like, what are the metrics that we're gonna, you know, what are the metrics that we need, and how do we start to identify, right? Like if you're talking about ending homelessness, right? Well, I don't even know how to quantify that if I don't know what does the landscape of that look like in the community. But then that can give me a good sense of, like, oh, that's the data that the city's collecting on this. So maybe we tailor some of our objectives, you know, where we're measuring some of the same things about our program, so that we have kind of a, you know, a guidepost. Similarly, like when you're looking at program quality or something like that, right? You might have an objective that's around kind of program improvement and learning. What are the standards that exist that you can, so you're not reinventing the wheel, and those will give you some sense of those targets, right? Like, is 5% growth reasonable? Is 50% growth reasonable? Like, you know, what does that really look like? It's so dependent, but those are some other, like, external kind of guideposts, so that you can make your case, and it shows that you've done your homework and you know the field really well. And also, you don't have to come up with all of that, you know, that data yourself, right? You can say, well, we know because of these standards that when we do this, you know, and hit this little chunk, we're taking a bite out of the whole problem.
I think that's fantastic, a really fantastic point to reiterate, Karina, especially for help, you know, that there are a lot of standards around equine therapy, right? Equine assisted therapy. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can probably pull a lot of really relevant best practices and statistics and data that the average person would not know. And that's, again, you know, I encourage you all to join your local Grant Professionals Association chapter. Karina's very involved here in Austin, and one thing they do.
I didn't mention that.
Yeah, they're fantastic. They constantly bring funders.
Talk to me about that after this.
I'm always surprised what I hear when I talk to funders is it's often these, like, wonderful, and this is a horrible generalization, but, like, sweet little old ladies that have been serving on their family foundation for years and have just, like, they're very excited and passionate, but you have to make it simple because they're reading 100 grant applications and they don't know about horses and they don't know about dogs and they don't know about veterans experiencing homelessness other than the large scale issues. So if you get too, technical, they're not going to understand. And the other thing I hear all the time is folks don't complete the grant application, right? All the time. We had to eliminate them because they don't attach the right attachments or so on. To my point of saying, if you can nail down your three goals, 3 objectives, that's a great starting point. You will stand out because so many other folks will have gobbledygook in that section. And as Stephanie hears me preach all the time on our coaching calls, done is better than perfect. Simple, easy. I would want to see, Carolyn, your goal, and your objectives is like reach 10 dogs. Great. I know what that means, right? Open the dog food pantry, bring on 1 funder, start small, but I can see you building it versus something completely aspirational in your goals and objectives that leaves me wondering how you're going to pull this off. And so just done is better than perfect.
I love that.
Well, we've got about 3 minutes left. Are there any questions from you all? I would love to hear them.
Karina, will you repeat the information on that Texas Education site that you were talking about?
And I will also add the link in my resources that I didn't finish filling out. So we have a group here called the Central Texas Education Funders. It's basically a group of funders that got together, and I say got together, they still get together and talk about, how can we make this ecosystem better with our grantees? And one of the things that they've done is created this common grant application that has a letter of inquiry form and a full application form. So some, they'll require different things depending on the funder, but they have this common form. The idea is, make it easier. I will say I've never submitted the same one to multiple funders, right? It always has to be tailored. It's always a different program, but I do just really love their format because I actually love how thorough it is. It's not open-ended, in a like, give me 3 pages on this. And so it's a nice tool, and it's just, you can download, the Word templates from their website.
I love that. I think that's fantastic advice and I'm stealing it. I will credit you. But one of the things I see so often when people are just starting to write grants is it can be really paralyzing, and people write these stories that are very focused on them and their work, and that's not what funders are asking for. And so to have an outline that's very well thought out and that's very deliberate, I think is a fantastic tool, because then, you can write that needs statement in a way that's really impactful. You can write that program section. I think that's some good homework. Absolutely. Well, fantastic. If there's no last questions, Karina, thank you so much for joining us today. This was fantastic. I have to say, this is the kind of insight that you normally have to pay a whole lot for. So I feel so fortunate that Karina shared it. I love that we had this small group so we could really dig in. I love that you're both working with beautiful 4-legged creatures. That was a fun coincidence. So I will wait until Karina can send over this deck, which she's offered to share, which is fantastic. And I'll send this out via email. So you have it, you have those resources and links, and stay tuned. I am hoping that our next Lunch and Learn will be talking about engaging volunteers and just sort of constituents, especially in this time of Zoom fatigue. And it'll be a nice mix of both, best practices just to keep people accountable and showing up to your meetings, and some high level guidance. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. But thank you all. Yeah, Karina put her email in the chat box, and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Everyone stay cool or inside drinking lemonade.
Thanks, you too.
Take care.
So good to meet you guys. Thank you so much. And
Nice to
please
meet you
don't
as well.
hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much, Karina.
Bye.
Thank you.